Thank you all for joining us at the Loop User Group. It is shameful to say that this is our first session of the year, given that we've had so much content and things that have been released, talked about, capabilities. So look, let's start the year with a bang halfway through. Guest access. I know you all want to know about it. We've all been waiting for it, and that's why we rustled up the right people to answer questions. In fact, Derek Liddell, who we've got presenting for us today, and Brian Mearsma, who might join us, they both worked on this feature, and they have intimate knowledge, of course, about how it works, all the tricks and tips and various things, and what might be coming in the future. So, Derek, I would like to hand it over to you. We are welcoming people to ask questions as the questions arise. Would that be right?
That works. Yeah, Daryl, just give me a signal if there's a question we should stop and answer.
Sure, will do. Yeah, so for those of you who do want to ask a question as we go, do raise your hand. I'll get you to come off mute or ask you to come off mute, and then we'll take it from there. But without further ado, let's hand it over to Derek.
Hello, everyone. My name is Derek Liddell. I am a product manager at Microsoft in the OPG Office product group. And so for the last 3 years, I've had the opportunity to build what you all know is the Loop app. Been at Microsoft for a long time, but I left in 2018 and then came back in 2021 to work on what we called was Chapter 5. And one of my initial responsibilities was to build the platform that was going to enable Loop. And so we initially had started out with a consumer-focused app, and you will feel very consumery when you look at Loop, but we shifted towards commercial really after our private preview because we knew that's where the business was for us. But one of the challenges I had initially is how do we make Loop Workspaces work for anyone? And anyone is different for consumer than it is commercial. So as we shifted on to commercial, it was really how do we allow you to collaborate with users outside of your tenant? So I'm proud to say we can now do this and give you all the details on how guest access works and everything you want to see. And then we have a bonus feature that we'll talk about today, which are our Workspace links. So that's kind of our agenda for today. It'll be a little bit of slides and then a lot of live demo. So with that, let me go to the next slide and start with what is Loop. In case there's anybody in the audience that has just learned about Loop, I just want to give you all some background into where we were 5 years ago. And, this is, right around the time the pandemic is landing, and we're noticing that not only are we working more remote, but information and artifacts exist in different apps and chats and storage. And you may be a person who likes to work in Outlook. I may be a person who likes to work in Teams. And it's just very hard for me to keep track of where everything is. And so that was one challenge we knew. People are experiencing information overload, like it's just too much. Like I personally, when I was away from Microsoft, developed a form of, I don't want to call it, let's call it anxiety around the Slack. Every time you get a Slack message, they hit you with that little chime. And it just, over time, that thing just, was anxiety inducing. And so this just highlights that there's so much information in meeting overload. We have to be careful, how we, get in people's way. And then, people are finding it challenging, to get work done and where to start. And, we like to say like Loop is really good for those messy parts of the project, right? Now, the artifact may be a Word doc or a PowerPoint deck, but in the beginning, you don't have all of that. All you have is ideas. And we were building a solution to make that phase of the project, really smooth for you and make it easier to track. So this was the challenge that was in front of us. And what emerged was an app and a set of experiences that help you think, plan, and create together. And in the next slides, I'll kind of go into the components, the components is not a good word because we actually use that word, but there are three pieces of this puzzle that allow us to think, plan, and create together. So really what we want you all to understand, the core elements of Loop, you have components. So this was the first experience we shipped. This was inside of Teams, inside of Outlook. You have these portable pieces of collaboration that you can share with people, and they can update it in their app of choice. Really powerful, perhaps the most powerful piece of the puzzle that we initially released. From there, you get into pages, right? Confining collaboration to a chat window is asking you to do very hard work confined in a very small space. So the page is where we give you full access to a new canvas. It should feel way different than any office experience by design, and that goes back to our consumer roots. Like Loop originally was designed to have a consumer grade quality. So you will feel very different writing in Loop than any other experience at Microsoft. Very expressive, heavy use of color and emojis and things like that to make our work, less monotonous, more fun, more expressive. So Pages allows you to do that. And then Workspaces came. And Workspaces were originally 4 to 12 people working on a shared project. This might be a demo at Ignite. This might be a research paper that we have to publish on AI, but the Workspace brings it all together. And if you have problems finding things in a chat, you'll never have problems finding things in a workspace because it's organized how you want and everything is right where you and your team members put it. But from the core elements of Loop, we need everybody to understand components, pages, and workspaces. And so how does it all work, right? So Loop components stay in sync across tools. We like to say in your app of choice, right? So I may be somebody who spends time in Teams, maybe somebody who spends time in Outlook or Whiteboard. With Loop, we don't care. If that's your app of choice, you can create a component and share it into a Loop workspace or share it into a chat, and people can update it in their app of choice. Then the workspace comes in with the Loop app and keeps everything in one place. Whether it's a component you were working on yesterday and you can't find the specific chat, or it's a workspace that your team just started, the app is the home for everything that you do in Loop. And so those key concepts are really important to understand. So hopefully with that, for the people who may be new and not really leveraging all of Loop or not sure how to explain it to their peers, hopefully that gives you a little quick, brief understanding of what we built, why we built it, and what we have. So now, before I go into this one, are there any questions in the chat, Daryl?
Nothing in the chat yet, but I'm sure there'll be plenty coming soon.
Cool. So we'll go from the 100 level to the 200 level. So now, why guest access? So like I said, when I came here, the first thing was, okay, we need an architecture that will work for commercial and consumer and make it easier to get people in the app. So the first thing we did was for consumer, we made it so that any MSA can have a workspace. As long as you have an MSA, we can do it. But like I said, we shifted sometime in 2022 into, hey, we need to be great for commercial. And one of the initial issues we faced at public preview and GA was, hey, I collaborate with people outside of my tenant. There's no way my business can be successful with only people from our tenant. So if you go back and look at our mission on the Loop team to bring people together to foster meaningful connections and shape the future of collaboration. And so we would extend this to say, and this includes people who don't work for your company. We know for the SMB audience, there's no way in the world that they can be successful only communicating in loop with people in their tenant. So we knew we had something to do there. And also for enterprises, there are many enterprises who collaborate with users outside of our tenant. So as we embraced why guest access, what we need to do is definitely embracing, hey, we've got to open these workspaces and pages up to people who aren't in your tenant. So this slide here existed when I came back to start working on Loop in 2021. But we've made one update, which I'll get to. But I made another update when I added this slide to this, and you can't really see the bold. But really, what we're saying is that collaboration tools have been evolving. And what we mean is that if you look at where we started, collaboration used to be I write a Word doc or I created a spreadsheet or a deck, and then I share it to you as an email attachment. Then you go through and you edit it and send me back a version. And like that was, early 2000s level collaboration. And the first disruption that we saw was, wow, Google has made it really easy for us to all collaborate in one document, right? And so with Loop Pages, we were really good at that first disruption. But if you'll see this bolded here, without boundaries, I added that to say, while components and pages were good in this category, they weren't good about being boundaryless, meaning that these smiley faces are only people inside your tenant. And so that's why we had to do guest access for sharing pages so that we could get people outside of your tenant involved in this first disruption. The second disruption was, hey, 2019, we start to see apps like Notion, Coda, and Quip. And they're really good about just give me your Gmail address and I'll send you a passcode and you're into our app. So when we GA'd and we were not able to allow any email to get into a workspace, we weren't competitive in this second disruption. So we had a tool, but it couldn't do for SMBs and enterprises the same thing that these competitor apps would do because we limited it to only the users in your tenant. And so without boundaries is the big update we made to this slide. The third disruption is also a recent update to this slide. When it originally existed, it only went to the second. But because we are living in this third disruption now, it was important for us to note that. But the one thing I will call out is we do enforce some boundaries here. So for instance, when I'm a guest in your tenant, I cannot use your Copilot resources. I can see any output that you've created because you had access to Copilot, but I myself am not licensed in your tenant to leverage those Copilot resources because they are so resource intensive. So in this third disruption, we're here, but we don't allow guests to really create new Copilot content. So with that, just hopefully you guys understand like why it was important for us to get to guest access, because we know you couldn't be successful without that ability to collaborate outside of your tenant. Now, how it works. I think Daryl will share this deck with you. There's a little video in here, but I'm not going to show it because we'll actually give you a live demo. But the things we want you to know is that the same B2B configurations that you use to share pages that are Word, Excel, PowerPoint, or to share SharePoint sites are the same things that we use in Loop to enable sharing. So we haven't created any new settings for you to set because we want this to be adopted, and we know the B2B guest work is already enabled by default, and so we're just leveraging those existing settings. The guest access that we have deployed at this moment will only be enabled for tenants that don't use sensitivity labels, and specifically you haven't configured page level, content level sensitivity labels or set container sensitivity labels that you do on sites. And the reason we done this is we needed to get this out to get feedback, and we can't roll it out to large enterprises until Loop workspaces have the ability to set a sensitivity label. So we're actually working on workspace level sensitivity labels now. It will deploy sometime this summer. We're working on more higher fidelity timelines. But until then, you can only test this in tenants that don't leverage sensitivity labels. And then, as I said, for the IT admin, if you go to your SharePoint Admin Center and go on into the policy section and look at your sharing attributes, these are the settings that we use to determine if we will allow you to share pages with guests and then workspaces with guests. And like I said, you should think of page sharing just like you do Word, Excel, PowerPoint. If you allow your users to share Word, Excel, PowerPoint from their OneDrive or from your SharePoint sites, then pages in Teams chats or Outlook or from a workspace can be shared with guests. And then if you allow your SharePoint sites to contain members that are guests, we use those same settings. And so from the IT admin perspective, you should be able to do everything you need to do from SharePoint Admin Center. So, to go have this take off, we didn't want to introduce new settings. Going forward, you will see ODSP ship a PowerShell command that you can turn off guest sharing for all Loop workspaces based on the container type. So we will be sending some control in the month of June. I think that's going to land at the end of June. For those large enterprises who are just initially uncomfortable, over time they may gain more comfortability, but we will be providing a PowerShell so you can just turn it off all the way. And then later, as we get 6 to 12 months down the road, I do see us needing to support the ability to allow this on a workspace by workspace basis. So your public documentation that you share with your customers, you may say, yeah, I want this to be shared with guests. Your top secret plans for taking over your competitor, you may not want that to be shared with guests. And so we will follow models very similar to SharePoint sites, but we haven't started to tackle that project on the backlog. So just some insight into what you need to understand from an IT admin. Daryl, I see a question.
Yeah, there's a good question here from Stefan. When I have a component, this component does have a page in the background. So when I click the link, it opens a page. Does that mean that we can also share components as well?
Yeah, and both ways. So that component could be originated in your chat or Outlook. That is in your OneDrive. Very similar to a Word document in your OneDrive. If you've enabled me to share with external guests from my OneDrive, I can share that component. Flip side, if I'm in a workspace and I decide to take a paragraph and make it into a component, I can also share that underlying page that houses that component with the guest. And I'll try to show how both of those happen. Cool. Well, I think we've made it to the demo portion. So with that, give me a second to grab a couple screens over here. Are y'all able to see this Edge browser?
Yep, it's loud and clear.
Cool. All right. So, actually, before I go here, let me drag this back because I do have a couple slides in here to kind of talk about this before we get in here. So, when we talk about sharing pages and workspaces, right? So the pages we just talked about, just like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, using the same configuration for ODB or SharePoint sites. So I'll be able to show you this is the same share dialog that you would see if you chose to share a Word file, and you pick external users and you can create a link that you can share. We do have another treatment of this share dialog that will actually send the mail. In this one, you actually get a link and you have to paste it either into a chat or some message to them. But we do have a version that actually sends the mail, like Word, Excel, PowerPoint. But that's sharing pages. And then sharing workspaces, just like you invited members before that were in your tenant, you can add the alias of the guest user and then click invite, and they will get the you've been looped in mail. The only difference is when we send that mail to guest, it has a tenant ID on there, and you can see that so that when they sign in, we know which tenant they're signing in. For example, if I emailed Derek Liddell at hotmail.com and I didn't have that tenant ID, I would sign in as an MSA. So the only difference is that you've been looped in mail includes the tenant ID. So with that, let me come in and start kind of showing you how this all works. So what you see here is I'm logged in to my test tenant. And I am a real member. This is Derek Liddell, the real AAD user, and I have a workspace. I actually have a few workspaces, but in this case, I'm in the hot air balloons workspace. And so kind of what I want to demo first is, hey, if I have a page here, and if somebody could do me a favor, I'm going to bring back up Teams. Put your email address, email address of an external guest. I don't know, Daryl, if you have one, and I can kind of demo what that is, if somebody can give me one. Boom. Thank you, Amelia. All right. So I'm copying. So now what you need to do when you're sharing pages is you need to, I'll show you that again. If you click the settings link, you will get the option for people you choose. And so, oh, I didn't get Amelia's address. Hold on. Copy. All right, here it goes. So what you'll see here is this message. Amelia is outside of your organization. Great. So I'm going to copy that link. And like I said, we have a version of this dialog which will actually send an email directly to Amelia. But Amelia, I'm going to paste this link back in for you, and only you will be able to log in to that. And what will happen is if you invite a user where this account does not have an AAD, this account does not belong to an MSA, Amelia will be sent an 8-digit passcode, which we call passwordless login, that I'm sure you all have used in other apps. And that means that Amelia can log into my tenant, and then we'll send her email an 8-digit passcode, and the login prompt will say, okay, where's your 8-digit passcode? And then she will get in to the page. Now, if I sent that to a Hotmail address, the login system is smart enough to know that, oh, this Derek Liddell at Hotmail is logging into this tenant, but he already has an MSA, so let's just have him give his password, boom. And then if I were to invite Derek Liddell at Microsoft.com, it knows that I'm logging into another tenant. It asks me, do I want to switch tenants? And then it allows me to use my tenant password to log in to another tenant. And so the system is smart enough to know if the user has an MSA or an AAD, allow them to use that login credential. And if not, I will send them an 8-digit passcode. So that is sharing pages. Now, to really jumpstart collaboration, we talk about sharing workspaces, right? And so if I go here, you'll see I can come here and add guests. Same way, I can add a Hotmail. Now, in this case, he's already in the workspace. Or I can add an AAD user. So in this case, you just add those users and you click invite. And what I will show you is, in this case, I'm logged in as loop80231 at hotmail.com. And if we were able to inspect this link, fortunately, I don't think they're going to give us there you'll see it. You'll see right at the end, we have this parameter, which is tenant ID. That is what tells the Loop login page that, hey, this user's actually got his login link to log into another tenant. And so that's how we know, to log you into this tenant when you click that link. But once that user logs in, they are able to see their workspaces that they're in. They're able to collaborate. If I go back to my first window, right? I now come back and I see, oh, my tenant, and there's his cursor. Who is this? This is Derek. Go back. Why am I not seeing his presence? We should see two people in this document. Make sure. I'm logged in as Loop 80231. All right, let's refresh this. Let's see something. There should be attribution on this. Yeah, I'm looking for it to tell you that there's two people in this document. So I'll have to figure out what's going on there. But in this case, I am logged in as Loop 80231. I'm collaborating in this document. And to prove it to myself, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to log in again. Bear with me, just so you all can see this. I'm going to close this other window. This is a live demo because I just want to make sure that you all are seeing what I expect you to see. Okay, so we're logged in there, and I'm going to go to Chrome this time. Chrome, new, give me a second to get a new incognito window, and let me bring it over here. And I'm going to go back to mail.com. And I'm going to log in as Loop 80231 at mail.com. Log in. And with this one, you'll actually get to see the 8-digit passcode. So it's actually a pretty good demo. So good. I've been looped in here. I'm going to click on this. You'll actually get to see the flow. So it's redirecting me. It's got a safe link. I'm going to get redirected. And it's going to ask me to sign in. So I'm loop 80231 at mail.com. And it sent me a passcode. Let me refresh this. So this is what I'm saying, that, hey, this account doesn't have an MSA. It's not an AAD user. So then I got to come back to this screen, paste in my passcode. And then boom, I'm in the workspace. And now if I go back to that original window, let me refresh. Yeah. So now you see there's multiple people in this page. There's Derek Liddell and there's Loop 80231. So that just highlights, just wanted to make sure that you all could see that, yep, two people actually made it in the workspace. So with that, that kind of shows how easy it is to share a page. I just go to my page link, choose the people the people you choose option and just put their email address in there. And with this can be any new user, even if they're not in your tenant. When you share the workspace, though, and you'll see we don't allow guests to share workspaces, because just because you allow Derek into your tenant doesn't mean you want Derek to invite all of his cousins into your tenant. So sharing of the workspace is only available for full members in the company. We don't allow you to invite other guests if you're only a guest in there. But once you do have the guest in your tenant, you can go ahead and invite them to a workspace. I'm going to go back to the deck for one quick second to show a couple of things, and then I want to take some questions. So, two things that we need you all to be aware of when you start sharing this. The first is, depending on your tenant configuration, the users may have to download Microsoft Authenticator and go through that flow. So even though I log in with my Microsoft password, the tenant may say, hey, I have two-factor or multi-factor auth. I need you to go install Microsoft Authenticator. I did a demo of this with my VP a couple of weeks ago, and he got hung up on this step. And so I just want to call it out so folks are aware that depending on how you configure your multi-factor auth, two-factor auth, you may have guests get confused on how Authenticator works. As you just saw, for my non-AAD MSA account, it didn't force me to do the Authenticator step. For my Hotmail, when I tested this morning, it didn't force me to do the Authenticator step. But when I used my Derek Liddell at Microsoft.com to log into these tenants, I do see that step is required. So I just want to highlight that, hey, check out your two-factor auth configuration. It will be the same flow as if you shared a Word, Excel, PowerPoint, no different, but we need to make sure that users aren't getting lost in these steps, because it's a few screens and a download on their phone that they have to go through. And then the second thing you all should be aware of is right now, we don't allow you to do a brand new guest from the Loop app. Our playbook says share the page with them first, and then go to lunch, and then you can share them in the workspace. But if we look at the mail that I just got, let me go back and grab it for, where is it? Where is it? Give me a second. I'm scrolling on my other screen. Here it is. So if I come here and copy this email address, okay, it's been about 5 minutes. I should be able to invite Amelia now, right? She's brand new to my tenant. Let's see if we get an error. Oh, so it takes anywhere from 10 minutes in this tenant. I've seen it be 30 minutes in another tenant. But what's happening is, to add you to a workspace roster, not only do you need to exist in the AAD, you also need to exist in what we call the substrate. And what we're seeing is it could be up to 30 minutes for that user to land in the substrate. And what would happen is it would fail until you landed in the substrate. We just saw from Amelia that was shorter than 30 minutes, but that can vary on tenant. So until we can guarantee that you're going to be able to do it immediately, which we do have line of sight on, we recommend and also enforce that for a new guest that's not in your tenant, that you share a page with them, because that's immediate. And then, like I said, give it 10 to 30 minutes before you add them to a workspace. In the next 6 to 12 months, I think we will fix this issue so that you can add new guests immediately. But this is definitely something, as we've been demoing and sharing this, Daryl and I have talked about this a lot. We talked about it with the MVPs next week, and it's last week, and it's something you all should be aware of. If the user's already in your tenant because they were in a Teams meeting, or you've already shared a Word, Excel, PowerPoint, you can do them immediately. But if it's a brand new guest, you should just get in the habit in the short term of sharing a page with them first, seeing them get into your tenant, making sure everything's okay, and then go back and add them to a workspace. So with that, I'm going to pause, and then Daryl, let me know what kind of key questions we have in the chat.
Yeah, definitely, Derek. One good question was asked about opening workspaces alongside each other. So you might have been invited as a guest, but you're also actively using Loop in your own organization. Can you tell us a bit about that experience?
Yeah, so we are working on a side-by-side experience. The challenge we'll have, though, is that your login here is gated by, like, all tabs share the same login. So there's no way in one window for me to have one tab signed into Microsoft and another tab signed into Contoso. And so I can kind of show you what I mean here. So if I go, we get out of here, and let's create a share link for my Microsoft account. So if I go Derek Liddell at Microsoft.com, and I create a link, and then I'm going to go back to my Edge window where I'm just logged in to Microsoft. Give me a second to find it. Where are you at? Yeah, right here. So if I go back here, I'm already signed into Microsoft, and I add that link. It's going to say, hey, you're logging in with Derek Liddell at Microsoft.com, but you're logging into another tenant. Okay, so it in this case, because I was already logged in, it's doing something I'm not expecting. Let me do this. Let me go to my email and grab a "You've been looped in" email and start from there. That will show this better. Give me 1 second to search my email. You've been looped in. Okay. All right, here's one. Today is Tuesday, correct? Okay. So here's one, the hot air balloons, right? And this one, I think you'll see the behavior I was explaining. So this is telling me that, hey, you just clicked a link to log into another tenant. Do you want to switch accounts? And I say yes. And now when I sign in, I'm going to be signing into their tenant using my Microsoft.com login. So this is where now it's saying, hey, to get into this tenant, you've got to install Authenticator, and I'll have to do some stuff on my phone. But the real important thing to understand there is that it made me sign out this window from my Microsoft tenant and log into this test tenant that we're demoing. And that's by design, because you cannot have one window logged into two tenants at the same time. So I'm actually going through the steps right now to actually log in as this user. But what you'll see once I do get logged in is that I only have the workspaces in my in the guest tenant loaded once I get in here. So give this 1 second. Boom. I'm into this tenant and I'm like, oh no, where did all my other Microsoft workspaces go? And you'll see this little message up here. You are signed in as a guest. Sign out and sign back in to use Loop with your other account. So to that question, in one window, you will not be able to have two sign-ins to two tenants just because of the way the cookies and tokens work. It won't allow you to do that in one session.
Yeah, that was a good answer, Derek. And I guess the follow-on from that everyone would love to know is it on the roadmap to create that beautiful Teams switcher for Loop.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So when we, so before we released this in the wild, we had 7 tap customers that we previewed with. And one of them gave us the real lowdown on how he needs that team switcher. And so if you're not familiar with what we're talking about, let me bring Teams over to this window. And so we call this the me control, right? And so if you look here, I have Derek Liddell at Hotmail and my Derek Liddell at Microsoft signed in, and I can add others. So yes, Daryl, we will be integrating the Me Control. We're coming in the quarterly planning, semester planning in the month of June for the quarter that is July through August, or July through September. And then as the semester goes, we also have October and November. Brian and I will be actively working on how do we bring the Me Control here so you don't have to sign out. You can just switch that. So yeah, that's definitely near the top of our guest access backlog. The challenge is we got a bunch of other IT admins in the total Loop backlog that are a little higher than that. So it'll be just a question if we can get that implemented in the next quarter, or is it going to bleed into October through December?
We had a good tip here from Renee, who, for those of you who are used to jumping through hoops or loops and using multiple profiles or in private browser, Renee suggested that you could open up that link in a private browser session or separate session, and then you can have your loop experience in one profile and the guest experience in another. So good thinking,
Yeah.
Renee.
Yeah, that's exactly, Renee, how we've been testing, or I've been testing it. Like I open up, you know, in private edge, log in as the admin, open up incognito Chrome, log in as another user, and definitely using an in private or incognito tab is the way that you can have multiple different experiences in Loop, without having to sign your main browser out of your company account.
Just another question. It's from Galen. Are you planning to add support for AAD security groups, mail-enabled security groups, to invite, I guess, the group to the workspace?
Yeah. So great question. So we are doing work now. We have a big project called Workspaces V Next. And so when we originally imagined workspaces, they were for groups of 4 to 12 people, right? And then we went to private preview and we heard people say that, I actually ideate by myself first, and then I, collaborate. And so we created ideas for that. So we have 2 lanes. The third lane will be a larger workspace that you can attach to an M365 group. We are also working on the ability to have a security group as a member of an existing workspace, so that, hey, I'm already managing an all-employee security group. I just want to add them as a member to the workspace. And then we have another piece of work where we may just unroll the security group and just add the individual members. Very convenient, but if a new member comes, in that case, you would have to add them again. So we're actually working on all 3. I think when we get on the stage at Ignite, what we want to say this November is that we know you love Loop, we know you love Teams, you're going to love them together. And what that means is, hey, when I create a standard channel, it comes with a workspace. When I create a new standard channel, I have the option to create a workspace where the roster and life cycle are directly attached to that workspace. And so that is probably my team's biggest project right now. And so we're actively working with all of our platform partners so that at the Ignite timeframe, Jeff Teeper can be on stage telling our users how great we've made Loop work with existing M365 groups. And that should lead into security groups, but in terms of priority, We're starting with the M365 group so that we can better attach to teams. That should mean that you can have a security group as a member, but there may be an incremental step where we deliver them separately. But we're actively working on both of those right now.
There's one more question we can perhaps answer before you probably show them something that will bridge that gap with workspace links. But this last question is, does this guest sharing cover the challenge of modern meeting notes in Teams and getting external participants access?
Yeah, so the modern meeting notes has call it MCO, is it meeting collaboration object? And unfortunately, that artifact does not work with guests right now. So meeting notes experience that you all have in Teams won't work out of the gate for guests. However, you can take the meeting notes file and share that with the guest the same way you saw me share the file earlier. So, if this, just close your eyes and imagine this was the meeting notes file, you could, do this, choose the guests. Now, unfortunately, you have to list them out one by one, get a link, and then paste it in your meeting chat. They can come into the file, but they won't have the full meeting, the meeting notes experience until we can work with that meeting collaboration object and make it work for guests. And that'll be something, Daryl, that we need to follow up with Dan Costanero on, like, what is the horizon for making that MCO object work with guests? Because we don't own that. The Outlook team owns that, and they are a much larger and older app, and it takes them a little longer to do things than in Loop. Since we're so new, we can turn around things in a quarter or a semester, where it may take them a year before they even think of that because their backlog is so full. What we need to find out from Dan is, okay, is it technically feasible given a set of changes that we can do it? Once the answer to that is yes, then it's like, okay, what semester are we going to be able to book that work with them? So we need to follow up with Dan on, like, okay, what mountains do we need to move to make the MCO object work for guests?
Now, Derek, just with the last sort of few minutes left, do you want to just show a little about how this workspace links works and how that might help?
Yeah, let me go back to my PowerPoint. I bet you I got logged out. Oh, I didn't. No, it's going to log. Okay, cool. So the next thing that we want to share in the last 5 minutes is the other thing, we talked about collaborating outside of our tenant. But the other thing we were challenged with this semester is making it easy to get people into workspaces. And if you've ever had to add more than 5 people one by one in the Loop share dialogue, it's a nightmare, right? And we've had a pattern in Teams already where I can just copy a link, paste it into an email or chat, and then a user clicks on that, they request to join. And then a user who's already in the workspace can approve them, and then voila, the user has access to the workspace. And so we're happy to say we now have this capability. And if you look here, when I go to the roster management page, it's just a button, right? And now when I copy this and paste it in the chat, users in my tenant can sign up this way. Dovetailing on what we were just looking at, we don't enable this for guests right now. And technically, we still have to prove to ourselves we could even do it for guests. But even if we could do it, I would feel uncomfortable doing a workspace link, into your tenant. Because now, I mean, at least if I add a guest and invite them, I have a trace that, oh, Brian invited Derek, and we can trace it. When we share this link and you tweet it, and 1,000 people just show up in your tenant, and you're like, where did these people come from? It's just not a comfortable place for us right now to say, hey, the workspace link and guests, we make them work together. So right now you can only share the workspace link with people that are already that are full AAD members in your tenant. We will take feedback on that. If there is prior art where you're like, no, dude, we can do it in Teams that way, where we have prior art, then it's something we can consider. But we erred on the side of security in this case, that we want to make it easy if the people are in your tenant as AAD users for you to share a link, but we don't feel it's safe to enable that for guests. And then right now, like I showed, it's manual approval. That's mainly because we also want this to work for consumer. And you can imagine somebody tweeting your consumer link and you wake up in the morning and you have 100,000 people in your workspace. It's like, well, I don't know these people. Now I got to delete the workspace because I just can't trust who has access. So we started with manual approval. In AAD only, we will be considering, hey, we want auto approval, much like Teams is able to directly approve. We think, for these large knowledge bases, that we will soon support in Loop, that like I don't want to go through and approve 1,000 people. Now we do have an approve all, but even then, like, we think auto approve as a configuration property is the way we need to go, but that will only be for AAD. So I think
that's
we made
all the
it to
questions
the
we've got.
end.
And Brian's been doing a great job answering them in there too. So thank you, Brian.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Brian has been my partner in crime in this from the PM perspective, and we've had a team of engineers working across the company so we could deliver this. So if you don't have sensitivity labels enabled or you have a test tenant with this configuration, please test it out. Definitely want to hear about multi-factor auth, and if Microsoft Authenticator got in the way, we definitely know that's an area we need to go smooth out. The new guest experience, like I said, share the page first and then go back and share the workspace. For some reason, for this tenant, it's like 10 minutes. For my other tenant, it's 30 minutes before they successfully are able to be added. But interested in hearing for those people who do that, how long it took for that new guest to get in. And what you'll see when they fail is you'll click invite, and then you'll get an error that we were unable to invite, and then 30 minutes later it goes through. But definitely interested in hearing on like how many people experience that.
So Derek, just one thing, sort of tying the two great features we saw today together. One view is that we're trying to use Teams alongside a Loop workspace, and you would, if you've got guests in a team, then your guests have become part of your organization. So that's great. It means you can invite them into a workspace. One tip that works quite well internally is using that workspace link as a tab, or even as a published link in your team. People can click it, then automatically request access to the workspace.
Yeah.
Will that workspace link work for guests eventually to tie or bridge that gap?
Yeah, I think that's something we're going to have to just work with our security folks. The good news is if Teams is comfortable doing it, the precedent is there, right? So the first thing I would do, Daryl, is go through a shared channel, grab the share link and try it with the guest. Because if that can work, then I have prior art and me and Brian can go negotiate that. Hey, we want exactly what Teams has. If I can't do that with a shared channel, then Brian and I have to go create art, convince lawyers that this is the right thing to do. That just takes a little longer. So let me go through that Teams experience and see what prior art we have, and then we can come back to that question. But the good news is our top semester project going through July through December of 2024 is making Loop Plus teams great together. And so whatever I tell you today could change in the next month or two, because we are actively working across our leadership teams and the boots on the ground and our platform partners to make sure that companies who use Teams heavily for collaboration can also include a Loop workspace to get the power of our canvas and the power of organization of a workspace. So I think that's good news. You'll hear more about it throughout the summer, and the plan is to be at Ignite, at least being able to public preview that with y'all. So while we can't do it today, some of those things could change before Ignite. And the guest access is one where we just need to find if there's prior art where people are able to either do it from a Teams share channel or from a SharePoint site, then we have ability to make that happen for Loop. But if they can't, then it's going to be more challenging because we got to get all the other, non-engineering teams involved to bless this design.
Well, look, thank you so much, Derek, for coming along and helping explain this in such detail. And again, to Brian too, is helping to answer the questions in the chat. Best to hear it from the people who are working on Loop itself. And so thank you all for coming along. And for those who viewed the webinar too, if you've got further questions, we do encourage you to ask them in the Loop community, which is the new name now in the LinkedIn group. It is active. There's plenty of Loop people in there from the product group that are there to also engage and also hear some of your thoughts and opinions about how you use in Loop. So keep the conversations going there too. Everyone, just enjoy your day. We're at time. Again, thank you to Brian and to Derek, and we'll see you again soon.
Cool. See y'all.